Hello and welcome to our event today. So I want to say first, thank you to Mike. My name is Tasha Cornish. I'm the Executive Director of the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland. So I want to thank Mike for the opportunity to be a presenting partner today with F3 Tech, and a special thank you to our other partners who make this event a success. As the only organization dedicated 100% to the growth of Maryland's cybersecurity industry, we're proud to support the collaboration between two leading Maryland industries to protect our food system. It's my great pleasure today to introduce Chris Haak. He is the co-founder of the Skyward App Company, a Maryland-based precision agriculture firm specializing in digital agriculture technologies. Chris was an early leader in the transition to digital agriculture. With a background in enterprise architecture and software engineering, he has been instrumental in Skyward's growth from a mobile apps provider to developer and integrator of large-scale applications for leading agriculture suppliers. He is a graduate of Penn State and the PA Rule program, a program that fosters the engagement of the public, private, and agricultural communities. Chris currently works as an independent consultant with HDS Technologies.
Thank you, Tasha. All right, good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here in just a second. Let me get that shared with you. I want to start by thanking Mike Tilke for arranging this with the F3 group. It's great having these presentations put together with great speakers and giving presenters and attendees the chance to come together to share great ideas. I'd also like to thank Lieutenant Governor Rutherford for his comments. I want to start off, before I dive right into it, when I took an early look at the attendee list, I saw that we had a lot of attendees from a varied background, a lot of producers, a number of people in cybersecurity itself, and some people in agriculture. So what I wanted to do with this presentation is I wanted to have a segment talking about an overview of precision agriculture, the ag supply chain, and how some of these interconnected technologies come together. So first thing, we'll talk about here the perceptions of agriculture. The perception today is that agriculture is only a manual process. Now, agriculture, in the act of planting and harvesting, is still a manual process, but we have a lot of technology built into it today. So most pieces of field equipment have multiple computers, we have autonomous operations, and we have technology that's interconnected directly in the field. We have equipment that speaks to each other, whether it's a tender, a harvester, or even aerial equipment. They're starting to become interconnected. And this is really important here. Just taking a quote from the Department of Homeland Security, precision agriculture, it took a highly mechanized operation and it connected it online. So this by itself increases the attack space that possible bad actors could use to manipulate the system. So this has far-reaching consequences in the entire agriculture industry. So next few slides, I want to talk a little bit about what precision agriculture actually is. This is a topic that we could spend hours and hours on, but I'm just gonna, in the next 6 slides here, I'm gonna give a basic overview of what precision agriculture is. So this here, precision agriculture really is site-specific management. So it's managing fields and pieces of land on a micro scale versus a macro scale. So this allows operators and operations to target well-producing areas of the field and also be able to manage less producing areas of the field differently. So this should increase overall yield and also use less overall inputs altogether. It also allows the operators to collect data on their operation. So this should be able to support them by making data-driven decisions. But as you can imagine, There's a lot with all the equipment in the field. There's many different standards and there's many different applications that are used to process this information. So this creates a number of APIs in the industry to connect the data across the supply chain. So with this, there's more connected equipment and IoT devices that are needed and are present. So we need to make sure that we monitor those and secure those properly. And we'll talk more about that a little later on. So this right here, this is the precision ag life cycle. So this is a really basic graphic here, but I broke it down into 5 steps. We'll see automation, data acquisition, data import, decision support, and plan implementation. So on the first, automation, so this encompasses a lot of different technologies that are present today. In the equipment, we can have auto steer, guidance assistance, and we can see section control on the applicators themselves. There's also automation present in irrigation equipment as well. So these all utilize GPS technology, and some of the technology present today gives accuracy to approximately 1 centimeter across the ground. So you can imagine that this is very useful for guiding equipment and creating consistent patterns that are used throughout the field and throughout the season. So hopefully with this automation, we'll see better plant health, which can lower the inputs and also lower the costs. So we'll also see here the second step in the flow chart is harvest monitoring and data acquisition. So with all these pieces of equipment in the field, the harvesters can monitor the actual yield and record that information. So this information can be recorded once a second or up to 20 times per second to get a finer resolution of data. And also with this, the applicators in the field, the applicators are actually recording the product that is delivered. So this can be used for analysis purposes to streamline the operations, or it can be used for regulatory purposes, excuse me. But with all this data can be very large. So the data today can be up to 200 times larger than it was just a few years ago. This equipment is monitoring the product that's going out, but it's also monitoring the metrics of the environment and the equipment itself. So there's a lot of data that's being collected. So something that needs to happen after all this data is collected is it needs to be imported into a single system so the operator can actually view the results and visualize what's going on in the field. But since there are many standards and different pieces of equipment, there's multiple applications and routines that are required to be able to bring this into one application and to display a map. After the data is brought in, the operator can view the information from the data that was collected in the field. They can compare that against other historical farm data, weather information, and even financial information. And this is useful so they can create scenarios so they're better prepared for the next growing season. And lastly, when the plan is implemented, the operator decides on the best course of action. They create the control files that are used for the automation step. And they can also utilize new devices to get information real time throughout the field and the entire farm operation. So as you can see, it's a large cycle. No one piece can operate all by itself. So from the data collection to the automation to the data import and the decision support, everything is interconnected. And this doesn't happen in a vacuum. This happens in a large network of connected applications. So you might say to yourself, this seems pretty simple. The industry has this solved today. Well, there's a lot of challenges to processing this data. And I'm not going to go too far into the weeds here, but especially this audience, I want you to understand some of the complications that are required with this data that's pulled out of the field that is used to help support these decisions. So one of the big challenges is overlapping data. So we have information that's recorded from the field. Say, for instance, this is a 23-row planter, for instance. So the operator has the information to see exactly what was planted where at what rate. But the problem with this is the equipment has the fine resolution, but when processing this information, all of the rows are always turned on. So whenever there's any overlap, what looks like an overlap in the field, the individual sections may have turned off, but it's always reported as on. So it's definitely a complication. So all of these overlapping points need to be filtered out. This last bullet point I have on the screen here, so all filtering, cleaning, and standardization happens post-processing within a farm management information system. I apologize, that is a mouthful. Probably more you should put in one bullet point on a PowerPoint presentation, but this is a recurring theme you're going to see in the next two slides. This is a very complicated procedure. To process this, the equipment in the field is not capable of processing all this on the fly. Okay? So this requires importation into a single application or multiple applications to standardize and start filtering this information. And I see there's a few questions coming in. I will answer some of those. I'll answer some of those after the next slide. So another area that we have here is data interpretation. So to really make the information useful, to be able to get an actual coverage map of either planting or chemical application, whether it's a standard chemical or an organic chemical, useful in both purposes, or whether you're taking or creating a harvest image. It usually comes into the systems as point data. So it needs to be translated and converted into an actual coverage map. So once again, a very complicated process. This is zoomed in quite far. As you can imagine, if we're getting data at 5 hertz or 5 times per second, and we're getting information for just using the 23-row planter as an example again, if we're processing all that, you can imagine the number of data points that we're getting for every single acre. And a lot of the operations are processing thousands of acres in any one season. The last slide here in this segment, data complexity. So there are a few pieces of equipment that actually do provide the coverage maps directly to a system to create the maps for the operator themselves. But as you can see, the polygons that are reported are of differing orientations and differing sizes. So really for any analysis to be performed, all of this needs to be turned into standardized polygons to have a uniform coverage map across the field. And we can see in any one operation, we can see there's multiple gigabytes of information that are present that need to be processed. And that can be for one individual field for one operation on one day. So you can imagine the scale of information that's starting to come through. Used to be a number of years ago, you might have gotten data once every other second, and it covered the width of the implement itself. Figure a 40-foot wide harvester. But now we're seeing information that can be possibly up to 200 times that scale for the field data itself, not including the actual engine or equipment metrics that are coming through and being recorded as well. So you can see that portability from the device to a processing system is really complex. And it's a critical piece that a lot of these systems and software, a lot of talented software engineers have spent a lot of time trying to solve. How do we get data from the field to the processing system in an efficient manner when we may or may not have cell connectivity out in the field? Once again, just emphasizing here, it's a complicated overall process. So there's a lot of required applications that play a part in this entire data stream. So there was one question, so I'll take a pause here and answer a question that I see. So a question that came through: are automation platforms available to small farms or limited to large operations? So there are dozens of applications that are available to small operations as well as large operations. So most of them scale with size, and the purchase price for using on many of them is based on how much you actually use the program itself. So number of these, all these steps that I mentioned so far are available on a multitude of applications and are available for individuals to use directly. A number of them are serviced and supported through a retail network. Because anyone in the ag industry today knows that it's good to have a number of trusted advisors that you can rely on to help you with things, especially when it comes to technology, computers, and the electronic equipment that's required to support some of these operations. And that leads into the second part of the question that was asked: what sophistication is needed to run and support these? So really, so you need the field computers installed on the equipment, and definitely recommended to have a high quality GPS. A lot of the systems that process information, it's a very challenging process to get data from the field onto a nice map. Because there isn't that much standardization or requirements of how the data is put together. So you can have so as an example, you can have a high quality field computer, say in your John Deere tractor, for instance. But if you couple that with a low quality GPS, the quality of the data really suffers. So that makes it quite challenging. Another question that came in here: can several firms join forces and provide the capital and talent shared benefit for all? Yes, in my experience of doing this over the past 20 years, I've seen a lot of operations that are actually a collection of individual small farmers. As you can imagine, this adds another piece. That there's a lot of net benefits to utilizing these technologies, but it is another step that has to be done. So in my experience, I've seen a number of smaller operations come together and they pool their talents. And it's definitely a win-win situation. All right, I'm going to slide to the next slides here. And then we'll take another pause and I'll answer some more questions as they come up. So in this diagram, and I'm just making a disclaimer, this is by no means complete. But I wanted to, in this graphic, show what a typical operation of the data, what the data stream might look like for a typical operation that might be utilizing some of these technologies. So we have information coming from the harvesters or applicators. A number of operations utilize remote imagery, and there's a number of on-farm sensors. All of this information can be used to generate a better picture to help drive better decisions. So to help with that decision support step. So all that data, it usually makes an intermediate step on some local storage somewhere. Okay? So that data, it might be stored on thumb drives, which is then stored on a local computer's hard drive and then uploaded into the farm management system. Once again, the farm management system is the one system that the operators will use to create the maps, help generate the decision support steps, and also create those control files for the automation. So once again, if I didn't explain that clearly, I apologize. So going back to this, so we have all this information, it's usually being stored locally, and then it's being uploaded into this application. Some of these farm management applications are run on the desktop itself, but it's becoming more common where they're being run in the cloud. Regardless of where that farm management system is being run, there's still that local data storage. Processing all this data usually utilizes multiple routines, many coming from the web itself. And a quick example of why that's necessary, when you have green data and red data, when I say that, I'm talking about the different brands. When you have green data and red data and blue data, and all these data formats don't talk to each other, there's no one standard for getting that information processed. There's some work that's being done currently to help make a standard, but today there's no standard for that. So you may have to go to the green software application on the web. So if you're a software engineer, you program to the API or the application programming interface, and you'll program to talk to the green API to get the green data processed, and then you'll need to use the red API to get the red data processed. And for anyone wondering why that's important, as you can imagine, these farm operations, they're usually mixed fleet scenarios. So there's usually a collection of some green data and some red data, or some blue data, or equipment, I apologize. So you may have a green tractor that's pulling a red implement, and the data protocol and the data processing for all those different steps, they're different. Okay, so they need to be processed separately. So just moving on down here, the last point, if you see on the bottom part of my graphic here, you can see that this farm management system, after it processes it and gives this information to the operator, the data is usually sent elsewhere then, whether it's to a buyer's information system or sending information back to a supplier. So a supplier may be someone who's helping with the service, or maybe someone that is supplying the seeds, for instance. Oftentimes they like some of the information back to see how either their services or their products are performing. There's the regulatory reporting, and there's insurance reporting as well. And that's just a handful of some of the outputs of this information where it can go to, besides just assisting the applicator themselves. I'll go to the next slide here, then I'll pause for some more questions. Okay, and the next slide, this slide is really busy. And this slide looks pretty ugly. And part of that was on purpose, because I wanted to show where all this information is being connected, how complicated the supply chain can actually be. So we see the farm management system, we see that it can take inputs from the tractor, remote imagery, on-farm sensors. We can see that this application may speak to service supplier, the regulatory and insurance that I mentioned previously, the inputs. If the operator is participating in a certain program with a retailer, the retailer may require reports right from the farmer themselves. So information may go directly to an end retailer. I showed before in a picture that we may bring in financial information. So if you're predicting good yield, oftentimes the farmer want to know, so should they do cash sales for that, or is it better to do future sales? And where is the best financial situation or scenario that they should be looking at? The direct processors, where they're directly selling it to, and then also ties into the distribution channel itself. So once again, disclaimer on this, just like I mentioned on the previous one, this is by no means inclusive of all the steps. Some use maybe just a small portion of what I have on the screen. Some applications will have more steps and more interconnected pieces than this. We all see that every step in the process, every piece of equipment, every piece of data that's created, it can flow to multiple places. And that's really important, especially I want to put that in context of this conference here and the theme of this conference. There's multiple data streams, and there's also multiple data lakes. So as you can imagine, different entities have different motives for collecting the data, whether it's a retailer to make sure they're in compliance, or to make sure that the operations that are supplying not just the electronic data, but the physical product themselves, to make sure they're in compliance with their programs. Whether it's the processor trying to collect the same information to get the maximum return on investments. And so everywhere we see that there's multiple data streams, and there can be multiple data lakes or data repositories. So by data lake, someone that's holding on to this information so they can do future processing of that data to see if there's any benefit from it. Okay. So I'll pause here. See a question came in, asked, would you please comment on the interoperability and compatibility of multiple systems, especially regarding security, privacy, and safeguards? So there are some standards that are being developed to try and make more of the data interoperable, whether it's applicator data, harvest data. There's even standards for trying to standardize drone, aerial, and satellite imagery as well. So there are some standards out there, and there are some programs out there to recognize entities that support data security and also support some of these standards. So I participated in a number of years with an organization called Ag Gateway, and they were working and are currently working on a number of those standards, and being able to give some of these software providers, being able to give them something to mark that their information is trusted and they've been certified that they follow both the standards and compliance and best practices. So I hope that answered your question. There are some initiatives out there, but they probably need some more time. They will need more time to come to full fruition and bring more of a sense of standardization to the data processing and the security. Move on to the next slide here. We're almost towards the end, if anybody's counting here. But on this slide here, I wanted to just call out what some of the ag tech software sectors actually are. So once again, I called out that there's a lot of smart engineers and great companies that are working to help make technology more accessible to the farm operations. Okay. So we can see here from this list, we have companies working on sensors, environmental modeling, pest modeling, irrigation, which we saw before. I called out the imagery and the drones, drone control systems, overall automation. We see here ERP and CRM. If you aren't familiar with those, if you work in a business system, if you want to tie into product available or pricing, like if you want to tie all of it in to try and run through different scenarios to see what is your best return on investment, you might integrate with an ERP, an enterprise resource program. CRM is for tying in your actual employee availability and scheduling. I mentioned before environmental reporting, financials, insurance, and performance analysis. So performance analysis is, what actually I did 10 different scenarios on 10 different fields that I was managing through this system. What actually made my best return on investment, either financially or environmentally? So my last segment here, I want to talk about some of the specific threats to the data supply chain. So the first one here, loss of data. Unsecured data, and possibly using programs that might not have a large disaster recovery plan. So on the loss of data, so in that first graphic I showed that had all the information coming to the local data storage. Oftentimes the data is stored on thumb drives and they are just stored in either a physical bag that's stored somewhere near their desk, or the data is dumped into an unsecured and uncatalogued file or folder on their hard drive. So it's very easy to lose that data itself. And also, the second bullet point we have here, disaster recovery plans for any application are a necessity. They, especially nowadays with the number of threats that are out there. So any one application, if they do not have a solid disaster recovery plan, they could be losing hundreds of thousands of acres worth of farm data on their application. Okay, of course, there's the theft of data. As you can imagine, there's a lot of financial plans and forecast information that's available in these data streams and data lakes. There's always the good old unintentional publication of data. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of personal identifiable information. As you see PII in the bullet point there, that's what that stands for. So if we're using a precision ag system, the farm management system that's in the cloud, they have multiple users of that system. Those software engineers need to make sure that there's no publication of any information in the public data stream, including personal identifiable information. There's a sale of data. So we have a lot of people collecting data, mostly for their own purposes to increase their efficiency. But it is possible that some of these companies might be selling some of this data for profit. Okay, this is an interesting one right here. So the falsification of data for compliance purposes. So this is a threat that can be an internal or an external threat itself. So an external threat for the falsification of data, an actor could come in and they could modify the records to show that they are out of compliance. So when they're out of compliance, that could harm their reputation. Basically, if it's leaked that that operation is using twice as much product as they should in a sensitive watershed, for instance, that could cause reputational harm. There's also the threat of manipulated data from internal actors. So if there's an operation that isn't in compliance, if they have the ability to modify the information, it could be made to look as if they are in compliance. So if there's access to some of these farm implements or sensors, bad actors could come in and they could have the potential of interrupting services. So interrupting services in the field equipment, on-farm sensors, or life-sustaining livestock equipment. So a lot of connected equipment for sustaining livestock operations. And the last bullet point I have here on potential threats is market manipulation. So as I'm sure the entire audience can imagine, all this data can really be put to good use to help reduce costs, to reduce inputs, and to help the environment. But if this data were manipulated on a large scale, this data also includes harvest forecasts. If this data were manipulated on a large scale, it could potentially have negative impacts for the financial market. So I do hope you all enjoyed my presentation here. We have a few minutes for some questions. I covered a lot of territory from what precision ag is to the data supply chain of this information to some potential threats. So I'd be happy to answer some questions here. I see some are coming through. Let me just switch screens here real quick. Okay. All right. So comment came through. Who's asked if I may comment on the outsourcing that companies are performing for these farm management information systems. There is, just like any other software application, outsourcing does occur for some of these. Most of the software companies are onshore here, and data storage is mostly stored here in the US. But it does happen, but I think that's an important reason why creating standards and recognizing companies that adhere to those standards is important. So it gives operators and farmers wanting to use some of these technologies peace of mind that the piece of software they're using does comply with these standards. So another question came in, how aware are farmers of security threats? For the most part, I would say they are not overly familiar with a number of the threats that are out there. With the proliferation of this technology and the number of devices that are appearing in farm fields and farm operations, we really, the farmer really should pay attention to how those pieces of technology are secured. So I originally was going to discuss some best practices, but I'm sure in some subsequent presentations they'll cover some of the specifics. We don't want to do that, but it definitely pays for the farmers to be aware of what's connected to their networks. Best practice to really separate their operational network from their business network, and to follow general best practices of what's being used on their mobile and desktop applications themselves. And once again, I want to say this plays towards wanting the industry and helping support the industry to make standards and recognize companies that adhere to standards, so that can be made public to the farmers and the operators so they can make better informed choices and use farm management systems that are adhering to those security standards. Okay, another question that came in, what is the status of precision ag being blockchain based? Well, it's interesting. There's, over the past few recent years, I've attended a number of conferences and there's been a lot of discussion about utilizing blockchain. I'm not aware of any one system that is actively using blockchain itself, but a lot of companies are looking at that. And to give a quick overview of what blockchain is, everyone has heard of Bitcoin. And in a nutshell, what Bitcoin is built on blockchain technology. And blockchain really is a distributed ledger system. So it means that records are stored on thousands of computers, but it's secured with an encrypted key. Now, why that's interesting for the ag industry is if we can start recording and having distributed ledgers of not just retail information, but products, product placement. So if you harvested 1,000 bushels of corn, where is that corn currently in the process? And it gives a great traceability aspect to the entire sustainable ag conversation. Another question here. So ask me if I'll comment on the role of artificial intelligence in precision agriculture. Well, that's an interesting question. And artificial intelligence has probably a minimal role in precision ag today, but its potential is vast because we all know, anyone who's involved in the agriculture industry knows that there's more variables that are in play than we could ever record, whether it's all the variables from the atmosphere itself or soil conditions. Microbes are a new aspect that's getting a lot of attention. So what are the actual microbes in the soil? Let alone the farm practices we're applying, the chemicals we're applying. Once again, I mentioned earlier that we could be talking about conventional or organics. These play a role in both sectors. But we bring all this data together, we still aren't recording, we still don't know all of the variables that are producing great yields in maybe one corner of a field and poor yields in another area of the field. So artificial intelligence is a great tool that can be used to help identify some of these unknown or underutilized variables that are present today. All right, if there's no additional questions here, Mike, I can turn it back over to you.
Very good. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Chris. Great job. If you want to unshare your screen, there you go. And I want to thank Tasha for doing the introduction. And I thought there were some great questions. And this has been a sort of a great primer to set the stage for the rest of the sessions going forward. I think it really helps people wrap their head around a bit of what we're talking about. And then as we proceed with the other sessions, the importance of protecting the data that's being generated. So Chris, thank you again. Really appreciate your help.
Thank you, Mike.
With that, we'll go ahead and end this session, let everybody have a bio break, and we'll reconvene here at, what is it, 12 o'clock or 12:15, I think is the next session. Let me look to verify here. I'm sort of off my schedule here. So 12:15, we'll pop into the next session where we have Ag Launch and Rantizo, sort of giving us more of a case study kind of presentation about the practical utilizations of data and its interactions with farmers and those that want to help protect that data. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you here at 12:15. Thank you.